We can reduce reliability. We can reduce consumption. But if we don't build grids, then we can forget the level of reliability and industrialization that we have.
Cheap electricity, 100% renewable, reliable, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Who would say no to that? Nobody. But not everyone is prepared to accept the necessary consequences, such as new high-voltage power lines on the outskirts of the town or even in your own backyard, or wind turbines in the neighborhood. Citizen protests and objections from conservation groups to infrastructure expansion often slow down the energy transition, and precious time is lost on the road to climate neutrality. But why do we need new transmission grids in the first place? Are there no alternatives? And how can social acceptance of grid expansions be increased? We'll find out in this episode. Welcome to the Smartery podcast, a podcast for and with the creators of the new energy world. A world in which energy will be renewable, decentralized and digital, bringing together electricity, heat and mobility. Let us show you how we will get there and who will get us there. My guest for this episode is Antonella Battaglini. She is the CEO and founder of the Renewables Grid Initiative-RGI. RGI is a unique collaboration of NGOs and TSOs from across Europe. In addition, Antonella has also been an expert member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Clean Electrification and of the European Commission Interconnection Target Group. And with that, let's jump right into the episode. Welcome, Antonella.
Hi.
So awesome to have you on the podcast. As I mentioned, you're actually one of the founders of the RGI. Back then, when you came up with the idea, who was involved and what was the trigger to start your own foundation?
Thanks a lot for having me in this podcast. So we set up RGI in 2009 because I realized that everyone was somehow struggling with the same problem, but looking at it from different perspective. Essentially, the NGOs have been advocating for a long time for 100% renewable as a way to decarbonize the energy system in Europe. And the newly created transmission system operators, thanks to the unbundling legislation, said, we need to build more grids to integrate renewables, but people don't want them. And so I challenged four actors at the time, two from the NGO side, two from the TSO side, and said, if you really mean what you say, that you need to build grids and you want renewable, you got to work together to make it happen. The founding members were at the time Vattenfall Transmission, which is now 50 Hertz, it's called 50 Hertz, and TenneT, the German, the Dutch TenneT, now there is a German branch of it. And from the NGO side, it was WWF, the European Policy Office, and German Watch. Today we are more than 30 members, so we have grown a lot in an incredible journey. And I'm happy to tell you more about it.
I'm sure over the years, what's it been now? Quick calculation, 14 years. I guess maybe your focus has shifted. So what exactly are you focusing on with your activities? Is it just the electricity grid? Is it also spaces for wind power or open space solar power plants? So what's the total scope of your activities?
So initially we came together because of public opposition. The fact that generally people were supporting the scale up of renewables, but they didn't want to have grids. Unfortunately, still today, almost 15 years later, people are still not making the link, and it's not just people, also policymakers up to a large extent, that if you want renewables, you need grids. If you want an energy transition, you need grids. And so we need to find ways to not only understand where do we need grids, how many grids do we need, what type of grids we need, but also how to build them in a way that it is fair for the environment and for the people. And this is our main focus, how to build grids well and fairly. But of course, we have moved away from looking at grids in isolation. We look at grids in an energy system context where grids are the enabler of the energy transition together with many other components. So we don't work for grid's sake, but rather how do we not forget this essential piece of the energy transition, and how do we make it, how do we build these large infrastructures in a way that is fully respectable for nature and for people, because the impacts on local communities should not be underestimated.
Before we dive into how you actually go about doing that or achieving that, just a quick outside of Germany, because of course I'm based in Germany and very familiar with the situation here. I'm actually in Hamburg, which is the north of Germany. And we are at the moment really benefiting, sadly, from a negative trend that's been going on for years, because of course the south, most notoriously Bavaria, lobbied against transmission lines across the country. They wanted to dig it underground. And now they actually see, wow, a lot of, for example, chip factories or even pharma is not coming to Bavaria anymore, but is going to the north instead, in the Hamburg region, because simply they're much closer to renewable energy because the power lines haven't been built yet to get the wind from the shore down deep into the land into the south. So it's really become a factor to losing a competitive edge. Now, that's specifically in Germany, a lot of discussions around that. What's the situation in other countries? Are they experiencing similar problems?
So I enjoy your example of the chip factory. I've been joking for years about saying, actually, if Bavaria or Baden-Württemberg don't want grids, well, the automotive industry can move to the north. And of course, this is not good. This is very common everywhere in Europe, and I would say everywhere in the world. And the reason why policymakers have not been active in promoting and supporting grid build-ups, I would argue this is only because of vested interest. By not building electricity grids, we have continued to support a fossil energy mix. Still today, in Germany and in many other European countries, there is a persisting narrative that renewables are expensive, that grids are expensive. And very often we read in the media how many billions of euros are needed to actually build renewables and grids. But what is not said is what are the costs for the alternatives? Because something being expensive doesn't mean anything if you don't compare to alternatives. And today we know that both renewables and electricity grids together are much cheaper than alternatives. If you build a new plant, what you pay for this and that is obviously what you need to compare. You cannot compare what is the cost of a plant that is being built 30 years ago with new investments. So everywhere in the world, everyone is struggling with grids, but now they are becoming a competitive advantages for those regions that have renewable energies.
Now, just previously, 2 minutes ago, you mentioned that we have to make it socially just. And let's stick with the German example, for example. The north is a very scarcely populated, so the costs for building grids, if you distribute it on the population, it's very high per person. And I think I'm now not finding the proper English term for it, but what you pay with your monthly electricity bill in order to build up the grid, that small percentage is very high in the north. And of course, people feel, why should we pay for it if it's for, sending electricity down to Bavaria so they can actually keep their chip factories? So I guess, I don't know if everybody here in North Germany really has such complex thoughts, or if they're just like, oh, I just don't want to look at the grid. But are those sort of like all the different social angles you have to look at?
Well, you need to look at many other social angles, and these grid tariffs in Germany is quite a peculiar situation across Europe because, of course, it is very unfair to let the few customers pay for the bulk of the energy infrastructure that is needed elsewhere. And actually, this is going to be changed in Germany as well. It's not the case in other countries. They have more an égalité approach that everyone has to pay the same. The So a fairness in what you pay is important. And I think Germany is catching up with that. A bit late, but better late than never. But there are many others ways to make it fair and just. What very often politicians do not realize is that social welfare is not a measurement for local population. If you build energy infrastructure, you have a physical impact at local level. This cannot be compensated by saying, but there is a social welfare in the nation. You have to look, how do you really decrease the impact and also the economic losses that such infrastructure causes at very local level. This requires engaging with local communities in a much more horizontal and creative way to understand what is that they need to improve their livelihood and use the electricity grid, but also the renewables investments to deliver these local benefits. It's a very new way of looking at that. Up to very recently, especially in Germany, but also elsewhere, there was this idea that you pay a compensation and then that's it. For grids in Europe, for each kilometer that is being built, 40,000 euro are paid to local communities. But this is not a way to engage. You don't write a check and run away, but you need to sit and see, how do you better use this money? How do you leverage maybe additional funds through the money that you get? And how do you build projects, activities, structures, processes that deliver a long-lasting benefit to the local communities?
Now, speaking of long-lasting benefits, maybe you do have some best practices where like a renewable grid initiative has been successful really in changing people's mindsets on the long run, maybe not from Germany, but some other European countries to get an insight into other countries as well.
So we have a number of activities that we don't run ourselves. We help our members to run. We call them implementing RGI declarations. We have a project that has been running for several years in Germany, which basically involves German Watch and the grid operators, where German Watch goes on the territory and tries to understand why people oppose grid infrastructure and so find solution. I think one of the most creative projects that we are running at the moment is in Ireland, where the grid operator, together with Friends of the Earth, develop joint narratives on the benefits of grids and develop together very specific community approaches that bind the people into this energy revolution.
Do you have an example?
I give you two examples that are unrelated to what I just mentioned. In Spain, the grid operator, every time that builds electricity grids, complemented with high-speed internet and provides high-speed internet access in rural communities. In Italy, the grid operator has equipped the pylons with fire sensors. And these are being rolled out in many other countries because it has been proved that if you have fire sensors on pylon, you can detect forest fires at least 20 minutes earlier than you would do it without. And 20 minutes in a fire is very important. And in France, our grid operators has basically developed, together with a local community that didn't want to have a line, an online system where they said, okay, we don't build the line, but if we need, you need to switch off. So they are in an app system where the grid operators send a signal and said, now we need capacity switch off because we don't have it, otherwise we will have a blackout. And these are just very small numbers of examples, and you can have much more.
I love those three examples because they really solve a very basic need of rural communities. Internet is so basic. Protecting them from wildfires is very important. And as you said, it's something that will stay there forever. It's not like a check that's maybe invested into a new playground or into whatever, a small school project, and then everybody forgets about it a year later already. But that's something people really can feel every day. Now, the last example, if I got it right, that was more a punishment. in the sense of like, you don't want that line, so we pull the plug every once in a while?
No, it is a voluntary thing. Just that, the idea when you, in your introduction, say we want 24/7 electricity all the time, full reliability. But we cannot have everything. So if you say no to something, you got to say yes to something else. And if you say you don't want a new power line, you know that capacity may not be available 100% of the time. And so it's a partnership where you say, okay, I accept to have less reliability, but I have to give something back. And so this is part of a compromise. And I think this is a very creative way of dealing also with scarcity, because it doesn't mean that we have abundance all the time.
So let's look more at the general picture and cover some basics. What is the role of cross-border exchange of electricity in Europe, specifically in regards to a successful energy transition? So why is it so important and what advantages does it offer?
The European electricity market, which is based on physically connecting countries' electricity system, it's an incredible achievement. Its main purpose is to have the lowest possible prices and solidarity. The more renewable energy sources we have, especially solar and wind, the higher the variability of these resources. There is a cloud passing by, the sun doesn't shine, the wind doesn't blow. This is what is usually named. But the grid creates a very large system, and the larger the system, the lower the variability. So if you have interconnection with countries, you not only benefit from the cheap prices from the neighboring countries, but you also sell to the neighboring countries your excess electricity, and you get from them where you don't have. Solidarity is a fundamental element in energy security. If you don't have interconnections, well, you will have blackout. We see this in the US, where they are not interconnected, they have a huge amount of blackouts. Another fantastic examples I would mention is when Russia invaded Ukraine, the European electricity system operators were very successful in connecting Ukraine and Moldavia with a line that provide backup option and security for cooling purposes and so on in Ukraine. So solidarity is fundamental. The huge problems that we have had in last winter with the energy crisis have been reduced thanks to interconnection, thanks to the fact that I have a system, a physical system, and a market that allows moving flows from one country to the others.
So it's about solidarity. It's also about getting prices down and creating overall more reliability for Europe as such. So quite essential if we want to become climate neutral. But if we look at it, how does it look like? Where do we currently stand in terms of expanding and connecting the transmission grids? At what level of interconnectivity are we at already?
We already have a very integrated system, and that's the base of the European electricity market. There are bottlenecks that have to be removed. One very important bottleneck area is the Iberian Peninsula, which is almost an energy island. Of course, island countries like clearly Ireland, but also Greece is very remotely connected, and increasing interconnection is important to increase stability. It allows for further integration of renewable energy sources and reduction of prices. We also need to think interconnection beyond the European border to North Africa, to Eastern European countries, because this will also further increase reliability of the entire system. One of the key problems of these interconnections is the question who pays for what, because sometimes you build an interconnection between two countries and the benefit will be in one or the other, or maybe in a third country that has not paid anything for that. And so there is a huge effort in finding cost allocation schemes, but should not be a reason not to build, because the advantages in economic terms and in energy security terms are enormous.
So the Iberian Peninsula, you mentioned, Ireland, Greece, but I also guess in Europe itself, Germany, for example, has a very pivotal role to play in channeling electricity from one side of the border to the other. And I guess there are also some interconnections which still need to be ramped up, right?
So this is another, I think, interesting fairy tale that we need to bust, because Germany needs internal expansions very urgently, like SuedLink, which we actually needed a few years ago, but hopefully it will be operational in a couple of years. Germany, like Denmark and few other countries, are very privileged because they are in the middle. And so they push their electricity when they have abundance to neighboring countries, causing problems to neighboring countries, actually. And of course, these allow Germany not only to have cheap electricity with increasing wind and solar, for sure, but also to benefit from imports when capacity is missing. The point is that because of the geographical location of Germany has been much less in need of developing storage capabilities because it has been pushing electricity across the border. Other regions like Italy, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, they had to develop storage capabilities much earlier because obviously they didn't have the possibility to push the problems elsewhere. That said, things are changing very fast because now also Germany is developing storage capabilities, and we need much more integration with neighboring countries.
That's so interesting to get a different perspective on the setting here. You mentioned very fast things are changing. Is there a time frame generally for ramping up interconnections and transmission grids in Europe?
We need to build as fast as possible, but we need to build well, because if we don't build well, we don't build all what we need. And what I want to stress is that it's not just interconnections. We need to reinforce the distribution grid as well, because more and more renewable energies will be connected to the distribution grid and not to the high voltage grid. And so getting the right balance between high voltage and medium and low voltage, it's a big challenge, and this will require the collaboration of all the different actors to optimize the grid needs, because we don't want to overbuild. We already need enough, and so building too much is not in the interest of anyone. And so optimization, I think, is the mantra of this decade.
Last two questions, Antonella. So is there any other reasonable alternative to expanding the grid? Do we actually have options?
Well, we can switch off. We can reduce reliability. We can reduce consumption. And I think some of it will be done in the future. But if we don't build grids, then we can forget the level of reliability and industrialization that we have.
Well, that's a very clear answer and a very clear choice to make. Now, yes, you founded RGI around 14 years ago. You're also active in the World Economics Forum. You're also active in some parts of the European Commission in some groups. If you had some spare time and you had the opportunity to build a brand new foundation, what topic would you focus on? What do you think would deserve a new topic or forum or organization?
Actually, started to do this and launched these two new ideas at the COP in Dubai in December. And one is called Ginger, the Global Initiative for Nature, Grids and Renewables. And the other is called the Global Renewable Grid Academy. And these are basically new, much larger collaborative processes that first, Ginger aims at developing assessment criteria to measure contribution to nature positive, which is very important because if we want to build large infrastructures, we need to do it well. And the other, the Grid Academy, is an answer to the recognition that grid knowledge is a niche knowledge and it is required everywhere in the world. And we need to be able to share what we know, what we learned in Europe, because in terms of renewable penetration, we are more advanced than other geographies. And so if we want to see an energy transition happening in the most effective way, we need to be able to share knowledge. So these are my two new toys.
So you actually already went about and used the I don't know where you get the spare time from actually with all the things you're involved in, but congrats, very excited. Maybe in the future we'll actually have Ginger or the Global Renewable Grid Academy as a guest here on the podcast as well. Very much would love that and are looking forward to it. Thanks a lot, Antonella.
Thanks to you.
The exciting presentations on grid expansion, the role of transmission system operators, innovative grid management and much more can be found at EM Power Europe Conference. EM Power Europe Conference is taking place from 18th to 19th of June in Munich. All information about the conference is available online at em-power.eu.